Excellent. So we're going to start off, like Isla said, trying to make it lively. This week we decided to start with a bit of a poll quiz. So I'll go ahead and launch that. Take a little bit of time, look through, please answer. We'd love to get your feedback after the quiz. But this is really just meant to be fun and to kind of review. So let's go ahead and launch that now. Okay, so I'm going to give you about a minute a question. We'll give you about 3 minutes. Take a look through. Let us know if we're looking at that first question. Where does DeFi yield come from? We love your answers too. Ponzi scheme, lending and market making, or asset appreciation. So we'll give you a little bit of time. Awesome. And then what is the difference between DeFi and CeFi projects and companies? Are we talking about DeFi smart contract driven, CeFi management driven, DeFi token holders driven, CeFi management driven, or DeFi token funded, CeFi VC funded? And then the last one, what are gas fees and where are they expensive or cheap? And again, give us your feedback. Gas fees are for investors who drive to the office and go up with oil prices. Gas fees are transaction fees. The more congested the system, the more expensive the fees. And gas fees are transaction fees. The more transactions, the cheaper the fees. Okay, so we'll go through. Where does DeFi yield come from? Where does DeFi yield come from? Anybody want to answer that? Give us a bit of an intro perspective on it. Maybe we'll share it with our two guests before I have them introduce themselves. John Devine, where does DeFi yield come from?
DeFi yield comes from participating in a protocol as a market maker, and you receive a yield for that service of liquidity provision. That liquidity provision can be either for spot markets, buying and selling Ether USDC, for example, or it can be liquidity provision on the lending and borrowing side, lending USDC for Ether collateral, for example.
Awesome, thank you. And then we're going to throw it to Kenny for the next one, just to be fair. So what is the difference between DeFi and CeFi projects and companies? Is it about how it's funded? Can you share some insight, Kenny?
Yes, potentially. Well, first off, going back to John's point about DeFi and what is it, market making is one of them, but there's, the grand ambition of DeFi, which stands for decentralized finance, is to take everything that financial services or a financial institution can do and find a way to more efficiently do it on chain, right? That's the whole premise. They want to get rid of banks, right, in their entirety. So that means that in their crosshairs is literally every service that a financial institution currently does. Market making is the one that John touched on. They found a kind of innovative way to do the on-chain market making and avoid all of the red flash boys or anything like that, all of the high frequency trading, just ridiculous arms race, right? So there's also downsides to it, but it avoids some things like that. Another area, in addition to market making, the one John talked about, is traditional lending. So I'm going to, post USDC, a stable coin, for collateral, and I'm going to borrow Bitcoin, right? There's an asset, there's a liability. It's just a lending book. So that's another source of revenue, because people who are posting collateral that's lent out on chain, they're earning interest. But those are just two examples and two of the largest ones in DeFi. But again, I can't stress, the goal is to get everything. And I'm not sure that's doable, by the way, but to get everything that a financial institution does on chain. So then the question, to your point, Gabby, is DeFi versus CeFi. CeFi is the financial institution. DeFi is doing it on chain. And the whole premise is we don't want there to be any person or small group of people that control how this operates. That's the polar opposite of CeFi, where it's the CEO and whatever the board who determines all of the lending requirements and make whatever the case may be. That's not the way it works for DeFi. The code is there. The code is auditable, assuming that you do it right. And there's the keys of the collateral and the capital and all of that is controlled by the community. It's not in the hands of a couple people that just they can run off.
Excellent. So here's our last question, and I'll kind of like, we'll see who races to the finish line to get the answer. We'll make it competitive. So what are gas fees, and where are they expensive or cheap? How about Isla? Can we throw it to you, even if you're not a moderator today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the difference between CeFi and DeFi, I think we can see what happened in the last 2.5 months of CeFi collapse, was that in CeFi, there's actually a management company behind it. They take in capital and then they do with that what they, in a nutshell, want to. They end up holding the whole control over the assets that they take under management, versus in DeFi, actually a smart contract decides what happens with all the decisions around that capital that they've taken in. So it's all smart contract driven. If something needs to be liquidated, they're just liquidated because they don't have enough collateral. Whereas in CeFi, you can, make an uncollateralized loan to somebody and the depositor will never know about it. So CeFi is management driven and DeFi is smart contract driven.
Excellent. So before we I know we sort of played a bit of a game this morning to kind of get things started, but I wanted to give each of our speakers a chance to introduce themselves formally. So for those of you who this may be the first time you're joining, my name is Gabriella Kuz, and I'm the CEO of the Global Digital Asset and Cryptocurrency Association. For each of our Friday sessions, I moderate, bringing to the table a few of our guest speakers derived from our membership who share a little bit of insight and practical knowledge on the given subject. Today, I'm going to throw it over to John Devine to just quickly introduce himself. John comes to us from Blockfills. John, if you can just share a bit on your background and experience.
Sure. Thanks, Gabby. Yeah. So John Devine here. I'm with Blockfills. I'm an execution specialist with Blockfills. So what that means is I take a look at all these different markets in crypto, from spot to options, perpetual swaps, lending and borrowing markets, and we figure out different types of strategies to deploy into the marketplace. Along with strategy and execution, we also provide market making services and liquidity provision services to exchanges and protocols. We're dealing with hedge fund clients. We're dealing with high net worth individuals, family offices, et cetera, on this type of execution. Before Blockfills, I was an execution trader at a company called Dharma Capital. They were a leading Ethereum hedge fund. And prior to crypto, I was a market maker at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the Intercontinental Exchange in precious metals, interest rate swaps, and the crude oil crack spread and natural gas product suite.
Excellent, thank you. And we're also joined today by another of our colleagues, Kenny Estes from Diffuse Funds. Kenny, if you can give a little bit of an introduction to yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Kenny with Diffuse. Some of you might actually notice that Isla is also with Diffuse. She is my boss. So this is a fun dynamic there. And so my background is high frequency trading. Did that for about a decade. Ended in about 2012. So pretty early in that game at a company called Gecko. Started doing a bunch of funds on the side across various asset classes, and Diffuse in some sense is an extension of that, but we are primarily focused on crypto. Almost entirely focused on crypto. We have two funds that are currently trading. One is a market neutral DeFi, hence I guess me being here right now, strategy, and the other one is actually an index fund that we're in the process of listing here in the US. So we should be publicly tradable hopefully by the end of the year, assuming everything goes to plan. So that's what's keeping us busy.
Well, very good. Well, we're excited to have you both with us. So today I think we'll just kind of, get started because I think you're both working on some really exciting and dynamic projects. So maybe we'll start with John and just ask you, what are the trending DeFi projects that you engage with most and how do they work? If you could just give a little bit of insight.
Sure. So DeFi for me is primarily on the lending and borrowing side. So we're looking for opportunities to deploy stablecoin, USDC or USDT, in exchange for over collateralized crypto. And the reason why DeFi is interesting in this regard, and I think this is an interesting time to talk about it, given all the chaos we've seen in the centralized finance, part of this whole crypto industry, is that DeFi lending protocols are code. And when you have code that is managing a lend borrow book, there is no disagreement on liquidation levels. There is no missing of those margin calls, because the protocol will liquidate collateral immediately if a loan becomes unbalanced for too long. So this is what attracted me to DeFi, and I think many of the participants that are coming from more traditional backgrounds, that code is law type of approach to lending and borrowing markets is very interesting from a risk management perspective. And I think we've had a great example of that risk management via a protocol has really been displayed in the past 2 months of the broader crypto market with our bear market correction and all of the externalities that have been associated with that in the centralized space with counterparty default. So that's a primary focus, certainly. Now the next focus is just liquidity provision on spot. I think when Uniswap came into play, I think we're going on just about 3 years ago at this point, maybe a little bit under. That was pretty revolutionary technology. The ability to deploy a two-sided asset, let's say Ether and USDC, into a liquidity pool and allow counterparties that I do not know who they are to transact on that liquidity. That's a revolutionary concept. And then on top of that, the amount of volume that has gone through that type of a protocol in such a short amount of time, quite frankly, is just extremely impressive. Those are the two main focuses for me: lending and borrowing, liquidity provision, and spot market liquidity provision. However, there are some very exciting protocols being developed in real time, and one of them is on the options side. So being able to deploy a covered call strategy via a protocol where you deposit Ethereum, for example, and that protocol sells a covered call against that Ethereum position. I can get more into detail on that. The final thing I would say is refi, that renewable energy finance, and allowing access to carbon offset markets, renewable energy credit markets. Refi has the chance to really broaden market access to these environmental products that right now are really primarily traded OTC, and you have to have relationships and to really access those markets. So I'll pause there and happy to get into color on the latter too.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and I'll throw it over to Kenny to see if he has any, thoughts. What are you working on, Kenny? What makes you excited in the space? What are you looking forward to, I think, in this area?
Oh yeah, a lot, I suppose. So yeah, a lot of the things that John touched on are bang on, right? Like the ability now to do these lending platforms are very exciting, but also terrifying. And I don't really know candidly what to do about that. So take Aave. Aave is an on-chain, uses the same mechanism that John described there, where you put collateral in, you borrow it, and then if the ratio goes below some threshold, you get liquidated, right? Not ideal. It's actually very expensive to get liquidated. So you want to avoid it like the plague. And CeFi, right? One of the advantages in traditional institutions, you get a margin call. Hey, you busted some requirement and you got 24 hours to make good on it. And you're like, oh, well, it's a pain in the ass, but okay, let's go ahead and get some money, move it back over there, right? That is not how it happens on Aave. You bust your threshold, you are liquidated. There is no grace period, because it has to be, because it is code. So something like that, like, actually creates a lot of friction in adoption, because people don't know how to operate in that domain, right? Because for you to put on that position and maintain it well, it's like, oh, hell, I've now got to write code to manage my liquidation. Like, this is something that is so foreign to most folks. So solutions like that are halfway there. And that's kind of the Gabby, that's kind of the answer to your question. Is what we're seeing now is V1 of DeFi. right? Where this stuff, it kind of works, right? And the mass adoption of what we're getting is, or what DeFi community is getting, is unbelievable, considering just how sketchy it is. There's scams everywhere, but people are recognizing that there is value here. So the thing that I'm excited about is kind of that DeFi 2.0, where you start to see better products, both from a user experience, from a security, from a safety, all of that stuff.
Excellent. And I think, like you kind of hit on this, and I'll kind of delve into it a bit more with John, but, some of it is really exciting, but some of it is really scary, right? So when you think about engaging in DeFi safely, what are you using to kind of help manage that? Are you looking at diversification, active trading, permission pools? John, if you can talk a little bit about, how you step into this space and you do it from like a means of like, I think, awareness and also protection. How are you engaging?
Certainly. So that's in finance, we always have to educate ourselves on the risks, and in DeFi, that's no different. And really, if you're going to become involved in a protocol, you really need to be educated on how that protocol works. So there's a couple different ways to mitigate risk. I think education is the number one thing, and just being, Kenny alluded to this. In traditional finance, if your loan becomes under collateralized, you get a phone call. In DeFi, you get liquidated, right? So just that basic concept is extremely important to understand, or else you're going to go through some pain. Now, for me, risk mitigation comes through diversification and through permissioned pools. So if I'm going to deploy assets into protocols for lending and borrowing, I'm not going to zero in on one protocol. I'm going to spread out my risk across protocols, because there are unknowns. And what I mean by that are, there are things that we don't know about protocols, quite frankly. And that's why hacks happen and funds get moved into a bad wallet, quite frankly. So diversification is important. I think being multi-chain as well is important. What we've seen, Ethereum obviously led the DeFi revolution, and now we're seeing other chains, Solana being notable, really coming onto the scene. And I think being on different chains and becoming accustomed to different network protocols is extremely important for that. So also we talked really quickly about gas fees. That was one of the questions in the opening prompt. And that can become a problem too, from a risk perspective. How much do I have to pay to move assets in and out of this protocol? And is that going to eat away into some of the reasons why I'm getting involved in the first place? So, Ethereum has been notorious, for the past couple of years, really, where it's been very high transaction fees. Now we've had competing chains try to say, well, look, we can offer you the same type of protocol, the same type of experience on a lending and borrowing perspective, except the fees are, 90% cheaper or whatnot. So I think that's important, not just individual protocol diversification, but chain diversification. And then talking very quickly, there's a bit of an advent here, what we call permissioned pools. And this is kind of getting, we're towing the line on DeFi, decentralized finance, when we talk permission pools, because the basis of a permission pool is, yes, you interact with code, you interact with a protocol to accomplish the same lending and borrowing, deployment of capital, but you know who's on the other side of the transaction. And there's a few different examples of permission pools, namely on Ethereum. Some other chains are coming up, but for example, right now, if I'm working with Aave, for instance, I don't know who I'm dealing with on the other side. And really, the theos of DeFi is that it shouldn't matter, because the code should be enough of a risk management buffer where you don't need to know who's on the other side of that. But I do think there is a place for protocols that do offer transparency on who's on the other side of that transaction. So especially when you start talking about maybe not over collateralized lending and borrowing, but maybe one-to-one lending or even unsecured in some cases.
Sure. Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much. You had mentioned like some of the protocols that perhaps can give a bit more insight into who's on the other side. Do you want to maybe go into a little bit more depth around that and just explain that for the group?
Yeah, I think the depth there is, and like I said, we're getting kind of we're towing the line on the DeFi theos, really. But the point is right now, from my seat, if I want to engage in a lending and borrowing deal off chain, that counterparty has to go through a KYC process. There's due diligence on the balance sheet of that counterparty. That counterparty goes through an entire risk assessment and is cleared by the lending, my due diligence team, my compliance team. So when we start looking at decentralized finance, how do you handle that from a compliance perspective? There are risks, mainly protocol level risks, because the code is law, and as we've covered, if you become under collateralized on that loan, you're going to be liquidated. So in theory, counterparty risk is very much minimized on a DeFi protocol relative to a lend borrow centralized deal where there's margin calls, et cetera. But I still think that DeFi has a place for integrating some type of compliance measures. And I think the low-hanging fruit there is transparency on who the counterparty is, who's on the other side of the trade from the liquidity provider. And the reason I think that there's some edge there is that's going to help, in theory at least, it's going to help some of these larger, more traditional asset managers get comfortable with the concept of dealing at the protocol level. And if that's how they can crawl, walk, and run into DeFi, I think that's a huge catalyst for the industry in general. So that's really my thought around why permission pools are interesting. I think it's going to help accelerate the adoption of protocol level transactions with large traditional asset managers.
Well, excellent. Thank you. And Kenny, I'm going to throw it over to you because I think, we've started to touch on this, like institutional engagement, advancement. What are some of the adoption challenges that you're seeing, or maybe even positive opportunities for, really bringing this more into the mainstream, getting more and more actors involved? If you can speak a little bit to it from your side, like what are you seeing?
Sure. So I have a little glib soundbite I use a lot, which is that there's a lot of people that understand crypto, right? They understand the dynamics of it. They know how to code it. They like all of the math behind it. There's lots of them, right? And it's probably a good thing. There's also a lot of people that understand how financial institutions work, how large allocators allocate, what they're looking for, what diligence is, and things along those lines. There are shockingly few people that understand both. And that's the future we're going to. You're going to see that those two worlds start to collide more and more and more. And some of this feature set, like kind of the one that annoys me a lot is the margin call thing. But that's just as an example of one of a gazillion things. Those feature sets are important to one side of the Venn diagram, but not the other one, right? Because, code's perfect. We don't have to worry about it. And so over time, you're going to start to see some of the understanding permeate in both directions. And then you're going to start to see some pretty kick-ass projects.
Well, that's excellent. I think too, we're coming up close on time, so I'll just give kind of a last minute. which new solutions are you seeing emerging in the bear market? You know, a lot of times we talk about some of the power of a bear market to bring forward, you know, new ideas, that there's a lot of firms that are even in the global DCA membership that were kind of brought forward during some of these like crypto winter types of seasons. You know, John, if you could just share a little bit from your side, you know, what are you seeing that you're excited about in terms of new solutions? And, you know, what is the relevance, or what is maybe the influence that we're seeing from a market downturn and helping to like push forward innovation?
Certainly. It's a great question. And this is something I think about often. So this goes back to one of my original thoughts on what makes me excited about DeFi, and it's options vaults. So I think what we've seen with this bear market is an increased interest on how can I get more yield out of my Bitcoin or out of my Ethereum without selling it. And obviously there's ways to get yield in DeFi. You can post, you know, you can lend your Bitcoin. You can post your Bitcoin and a stable coin to a liquidity pool and earn a yield from liquidity provision. But there's also risks, directional risks in that, as we call impermanent loss. These option vaults are allowing people to understand, or at least begin to understand, what is a call option. You know, and a call option is the right to buy an underlying asset at a predetermined price on a predetermined date. So if you own Bitcoin, you can sell someone the right to own your Bitcoin at a higher price. Okay. And if we're in a downward trending market, that might become interesting, because the yields, what someone's willing to pay you for that optionality to own your Bitcoin, they can exceed the yields that are found in the lending and borrowing market or the liquidity provision pools on spot. There's also a huge catalyst there just from the individual's education. A lot of people who own crypto, this is really, this is their first dive into, and those who own crypto that are getting into DeFi, this is really their first dive into finance in a sense. You know, there's a lot of people who own crypto that are from the tech side, or they are just speculator investors. So now people are becoming educated on options and the ability to sell someone the right to own your Bitcoin at a higher price at a future date. And there's a yield there. And in a downward market, I think this is the catalyst for people to broaden their education and see what else they can do with these protocols.
What we'll do for the next about 10 minutes or so is just share some of the discussion points from the groups and surface some of the key learnings from the week, so that we can maybe add some different viewpoints with the help of the speakers today. I might call someone randomly. Tony, what is something that you took away from John while you were in the group?
Sorry, John's a mindful of information, as you know, and he's in the middle of all this and sees all the flows and the different opportunities and problems that people have. And we have a sort of a similar outlook where there's a lot of opportunity, but you have to manage the risk. And, I brought us back to the point that Kenny made, his soundbite about there being so many people in DeFi who know the protocols and the contracts, smart contracts and the code, and so many people in TradFi who know the risk management side, but very few with both skill sets in DeFi. So you really have to be careful is the point that I took away. I just wanted to confirm that with John. But there are opportunities.
That's right. Just real quick, we were touching on spot liquidity provision, like in Uniswap, where you deposit Ethereum and you deposit USDC, and now you can provide a quote, a bid offer, basically. And if there's more demand in that pool, more people want to buy Ethereum, you're going to be selling your Ether as that market's going higher. If there's more supply, there's more people who want to be selling that Ethereum, you're going to be buying it as the market's going lower. And that's that impermanent loss that we talk about. And what me and Tony were touching on just a bit is, it's great to be involved in these protocols, but how do you manage that risk? It's not terribly sophisticated, but it requires study and it requires dedication to to really be involved in in that type of spot liquidity provision responsibly. In short.
Does anybody else have any other thoughts on kind of taking part in this market responsibly? Maybe something that you have done yourself, whether you have been part of any of these platforms, and how you think about risk when it comes to this space.
Well, this Colin, so I'll mention something that Kenny mentioned at the end of our session that I think also mentioned something John said about, he mentioned that anonymity is one thing that kind of works against these profiles. John had said somewhat the same thing. So if I'm looking at what kind of protocol I'm going to invest in, like I want to know who is behind it, who's writing the code, who's developed the protocols, what are their qualifications. I think that's a really important thing, where trusting code is one thing, but code is written by a person or a group of people that isn't, I'd like to know a little bit more about, rather than just reading a nice white paper, which is kind of ironic for someone who writes nice white papers for a living, which I do. There you have it.
It's a really interesting point, because there's part of crypto is this promise of trusting the code and anonymity being accepted because you trust the technology. But the reality is that 99% of people cannot read the code. And even those who can read the code, there's so many smaller provisions in there that they could overlook, or that they don't understand why they're there in the first place. So being able to talk to a human of why this is actually happening and why things are written the way they are, I think it's a really valuable piece. I think it has become more common now to reveal your identity and do kind of a KYC type of thing around each project, but we're far away from complete, I'd say, in that. Anything else that folks took away from the conversations in the breakout room? Anne-Marie, anything that comes up for you?
Well, I think, one of the issues is that, DeFi, because there's so little control over the space, that, it leads potentially to a lot of scams and people getting hurt, and that, it's difficult because you need some sort of controls, and the regulators are looking for some control over the space, or somebody who's answerable to have eyes on the transaction, but that goes against the whole idea of DeFi. So, but if you allow these scams and illegal activity to happen, then it also gives a black eye to the whole industry, and people in the general public don't necessarily delineate whether it's a DeFi transaction somebody got scammed through or just a regular crypto transaction. So it can turn off a lot of people to the industry generally. So it's a challenge. There are no easy answers to this, but hopefully if there maybe some safeguards can be built into the DeFi space, I think that would make regulators feel better, and it would help with the whole perception of the crypto industry and keep people safer too.
They make a valid point there. It is unclear whether a regulatory body can come in here and actually take responsibility for what's happening, and B, whether that's actually the best outcome for this whole industry. Kevin, what are your thoughts? Anything that you took away from the group discussions?
Yeah, me and Anne-Marie kind of bounced back and forth about I guess involving what regulatory aspects should be put in place. And I'm actually seeing what I've seen from the standpoint of the investigation law enforcement side. If we can't really come to a consensus of how it's going to be controlled, I'm all for certain countries outlawing it. I'm gonna be very frank about it. I think that there's just so much of a framework that isn't set up for there to be some sort of inherent trust for people to have confidence that there isn't going to be some sort of rug pull. And from a standpoint of the legacy coins that we have, like Ethereum and Bitcoin, we're seeing more of the criminal actors gravitating towards this DeFi, whether they're automatically selling purloined funds with Bitcoin and Ethereum to the tethers, to the stable coins, and sending them off from the traditional exchanges to the DeFi exchanges. And we're seeing that. And I'm a very big fan of the concept. I'm a very big fan of the magic that goes on behind the scenes involving DeFi, understanding the codes, understanding the things of that nature. But from a practicality standpoint, there has to be some sort of trust there. Like with the stock market, the SEC, it's very regulated how before the initial public offering goes up, there has to be a lot of I want to say there has to be a lot of protocols in place versus me just generating my own hype about a coin, putting out my ICO, my white paper about this coin, saying how this coin's going to do this, that, and the other thing, and just gathering enough social media attention, gathering enough of the cheerleaders to promote the coin. I can quintessentially, like Seinfeld, a show about nothing. I can make something very successful, but when you look at it from a standpoint of what exactly is this, it's nothing. And then you have people that are leveraging other, coins against nothing. And then that's where I feel that, not from an Orwellian Big Brother standpoint, we need to have this formation of some sort of government entity to focus on this. I just feel that, and I said this on a few calls ago, the exchanges need to do a better job. They need to do a better job of keeping these poop coins off the markets. They need to do a better job of that. And I feel once there's more trust in cryptocurrency in general, I feel that DeFi will definitely have its spotlight. But for right now, like I'm one of the people who are kind of, I think there needs to be more in place, or otherwise we should stay away.
Yeah, and one of the things too is if we don't define some safeguards for the industry, there is a chance that our U.S. government is going to shut it down. So I had a conversation with one of the SEC commissioners who said it is not off the table at all, and it's a definite possibility that they just say no more DeFi, which would be terrible. And so either we find a solution, or that is a definite possibility. So. It's just one of the realities that we face. She said she wasn't in favor of that. She didn't want to see that happen, but so that there are definite issues here that if either we address them as an industry, or the government's going to find a way.
Can I jump in on that point real quick? So my thinking is that a lot of the way the regulators, especially in the US, are approaching this is it's a legacy mindset, in the sense of the dollar has been the world reserve for however long, and all the financial regulations for the traditional financial system in one way, shape, or form go through New York. So it gives them an outsized amount of control. And they're trying to use that same mentality when they're looking at crypto and DeFi. Doesn't work. The whole point of DeFi is it's decentralized, right? So what's going to happen, and you already seen, is like we one of our board members, like he gets not one of our board members, one of our advisors, friends, he gets board offers all the time where the condition is he cannot live in the US, can't trade derivatives in the US, right? So what's happening is the concept of a geographically based regulator in a DeFi crypto landscape makes zero sense. But the US is so stuck that they're still thinking that they can unilaterally make regulations that the rest of the people, the rest of the world are going to fall into line. And that's just not how it's going to play out. What's really going to happen, to your point, Anne-Marie, the government's not going to shut it down. The government's going to take, if they do a heavy-handed action, they will try to shut it down. They will fail, and the U.S. will become a technological backwater.
And so I can talk a little bit too to some of what we've seen in countries where there have been active bans. So, Nigeria previously had a ban just generally on cryptocurrencies, not even on DeFi. That ban had to be rolled back or walked back by the central bank because essentially it becomes almost unenforceable. Like that's kind of the challenge. And so I think again, as somebody like from my background, I pull very heavily from like the World Bank. So we worked with regulators, we worked with civil society. And that's where you start to see the fact that you need something that is almost like going to act as a global sort of community convening force to try to advance sort of good practices and standards in alignment with or in partnership with a lot of the different regulators and government agencies. And so that's kind of the space that, we seek to occupy as the global DCA, and understand that, if your ultimate objective is consumer protection and investor protection, then there needs to be something that fills this gap, because everybody, I think, all around the table, at least in the breakout session we had and some of the discussions we've had, everybody knows that something's missing. It's just, what is that thing, right? And so that's where I think, at least when we look at what a pragmatic answer could be in the interim, at the very least, you're looking at self-regulation. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that as well.
Jamil, anything on your mind, something that kind of caught your attention during the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of cleanup to do. There's a lot of perception. I mean, the equipment, the protocols work great so far, and I only see improvements going forward. And like you said, we have an opportunity to invest in infrastructure, and that's wonderful. The big barrier getting past them is what happened the past 2.5 months. With a lot of people getting harmed and hurt by DeFi and by centralized, and people are financially not literate. They combine DeFi and CeFi together and say, "Oh, this happened in crypto," even if it's not related to DeFi. So you now have a perception barrier to deal with first, before you have people who are going to be flocking in to be new clients and build things. So.
Any closing thoughts from Kenny or from John?
Yeah, I mean, just reiterate, DeFi is risky, right? And it's new. Don't lose sight of that. Ayla, to your point about 99.9% of people don't read the code, that's totally correct. And you don't know what the risks are unless you do. You just don't. I think as an example of one of the things that the anonymity and how sketchy it is out there, like one of the biggest exchanges, one very large on-chain exchange, the actual money is managed by, it's an AMM, is managed by a 15 signatory multi-sig wallet. So the way the multi-sig wallets work is that a quorum has to basically sign a transaction before anything goes through. So 8 of 15 in this case, right? It's anonymous. For all we know, is one dude with 15 wallets. We have literally no idea. There's hundreds of millions of dollars sitting there. I mean, is that a risk that you should take? I don't know, right? But not at least understanding what that risk is and that is a thing that can happen. You're gonna have a bad day, bad time.
Yeah.
Well said, Kenny. And I'll close with, I think we are so early, and everyone on this call is super early into this space. This is the time to educate ourselves and all grow together and learn how we can interact in this decentralized finance world responsibly. I think that responsibility certainly finds a foundation in diversifying which protocols you're interacting with, and also exploring the more permission side of DeFi as well. And then really, getting into the code a bit, even if you're not super technical, maybe finding resources that can assist with some of the technicality of the code and where you should be driving your assets.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And this is a space to watch. A lot of opportunities here, but I'm excited to see what's happening in the next 18 months in this universe. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We will do another round of this next week. That'll be week 5. You'll have access to all the course content as of end of the day today. And a recording of this will be uploaded on the platform within a couple of days or so. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Gabby and Ayla.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.